Yo, what's up? This is Rez Inyanzi. Welcome to my studio. I'm a South African-based photographer. And yeah, having a little chat with SA creatives. Stay tuned. I think the major message in my images is really about representation. I suppose photography is not a new thing on the continent, but it hasn't always been done by us. It's always other people looking at us. And I suppose one of the most important things was, what do images start feeling like and looking like when it's us looking at us, but with a little more intent, with a little more sensitivity. So I think ultimately when you look at my work, I hope you get a sense of a fair representation, a very careful and well-considered representation of Black people. Yo man, it's really tricky. I think for me, a large part of my inspiration is like who I am. So like I travel a lot to the Eastern Cape just to touch base, to look around the space, to fill it out. And I think that's what informs my work. But also I'm not too concerned about photographs informing my work. So I allow music to inform my work. I allow ceramics to inform my work. So I think the larger the pool of influence, the more diverse the outcome. But also I think things like dreams, man, like dreams are quite interesting spaces. They're always set up differently from reality. And I think that's one place that can constantly offer innovation. Yeah, I think primarily the challenges that I've faced with being a photographer in Black spaces is that image makers are not really trusted. Photography is always something that has come to take from people, and people never know where the images are going, or they end up in unsavory spaces on social media, so on and so forth. So for me, one of the challenges was really gaining trust as an image maker. Especially I work in a lot of ceremonial spaces and a lot of ritual spaces, and those spaces in their nature are very sacred, and that kind of demands room for a bit of secrecy. So I think to be able to navigate those spaces as a photographer has been really challenging. And how do I maintain respect and reverence while at the same time getting the image and telling the story? I suppose what fascinates me about Black culture is a self-exploration, a self-discovery. A lot of the images that I make are also around Xhosa people. So it's really a way of looking at self through other people. And I've always been in that world. I was raised in a very traditional homestead. So I think when I started making art, it reflected my upbringing. It reflected my grandmother's teachings. It reflected going to the mountain, all of those stuff. And I think more than me trying to adapt a different personality in my artworks, it was about how do I become who I am? How do I express who I actually am using the mediums that are available? Hey man, I think that's a tricky one. Stereotypes are avoided, I suppose, by different approaches. And in my photography, one thing that's very important is consent. You know, I don't do parachute photography. I don't go into people's spaces and make images without them giving me permission. I don't make images unless they fully understand why I want the image, what am I going to do with the image. And I think one of the stereotypes is this idea that people can just walk into the ghetto and take. Everything is available. We see tourist buses driving by and they'll be taking pictures of us with no consent. So one of the important things was to give Black people agency, to say as much as you're in the hood like me, you still have permission. You still have the right to say no to me wanting to tell your story. Because at the end of the day, it is yours. I'm just like a middleman. But I see something there that I think could be so much greater when shared with the world. But it's like this careful negotiation of space to be able to be like, this is what I want to do, but I want you to still feel a sense of humanness. I still want you to feel your dignity as we do it. Yeah, I think when I started photography, I didn't have an idea of the country's visual lexicon, so to speak. But through like studying photography, I interacted with a couple of interesting image makers. I think Prasanto Mofokeng's work was quite seminal for me. The way that he represented Blackness spoke a lot to the kind of work that I thought I wanted to do at the time. I also am a fan of Sabelo Mlangini's work. I really appreciate like the thoughtfulness in his images and just the care that he takes when he makes the work. But also like someone like Raendro Chabang. who's also like an image maker, works a lot in black and white, in black spaces. But I think there was something about him looking at the quotidian that made me resonate with his photography, to really be like, we don't always have to find the spectacular. It doesn't need to be someone dying. Sometimes just quiet moments really do resonate so much memory and so much sense, I suppose. So yeah, so I think those three image makers were really important for me in finding my voice. I suppose the impact I'd love my images to have is one that shows that images aren't just about recording. I think we think of images as the final product, as though they are the definite thing. But I think of photography as like portals, or photographs rather, as portals to other worlds. And I think if there's anything that I'd love to do with my work, it's that. It's to see how can I transport you from this present moment to another, just using images. And how can photography, in that sense, become a vehicle for imagination as opposed to like a data capturing system. So yeah, man, it's like I come from a rich culture of folk tales, of weird imagination, so to speak. And I want that to live on in my photography. I want my blackness to be represented in my imagination and the way that I navigate and think about space. And if I'd be able to do that successfully, I think I'd say I'm a successful photographer. I always think of space as a collaborator. So when I go to photograph, I don't go with like a predetermined plan. I have this whole thing that when I get there, the environment will also influence the kind of images that I make. And the things that speak to Rez, the photographer, are normally there. So ultimately how I make images is in valuing experiences, in really making the time to travel, making the time to visit, making the time to take the walk. And in the process of living, I think the images are just part and parcel, but they don't exist separate from the person that I am. They're almost like, I suppose, drop points in the normal everyday experience that I have. So right now, my plans for the remainder of the year, I'm putting together a publication. It's not only my works, it's a collaboration between myself and a few photographers from across the country. And this is because I think there's a lot of value in publications, and we've lost that with social media. There's this immediate access to information and images. But I really would love to carefully curate and think about having a publication that looks just at photography, the writing around photography, thinking around photography and the conventions therein. I'm also showing work at Fort Hare. I'm doing a lot of work in the Eastern Cape, which is where I'm from. So I'm doing an exhibition of Glande Lumoya at Fort Hare in August. And I think that's also just to show that photography is an actual living art form within the Eastern Cape, because I think it's not seen like that. Everybody thinks about painting and sculpture, but for me to keep doing these activations where I'm showing photographic works and I'm opening conversations with the community really does allow space for the actual medium to live. But yeah, man, other than that, I'm just in the streets making images.